The Sunday light in Charleston came in slow through the tall windows on South Battery, gold as steeped tea. Everett Bramwell knelt beside the mahogany door, wrench in hand. Sleeves of his old blue flannel rolled to the elbow. From her armchair, Eleanor Prescott lifted her cup. Careful of the top screw, Everett. Keys jangled in the archway. Marlowe Prescott stopped mid-step. Recognition crossed the room like a wire pulled tight. "What are you doing in my mother's house?" Everett stood. Eleanor set her cup down. "Marlowe, this is Everett Bramwell. I know. I signed his termination 3 weeks ago." 6 months earlier, on a bright Saturday in March, Marion Square had smelled of new earth and coffee. Eleanor Prescott had been standing at the edge of a produce stall when the wheel of her cart caught on a loose brick and 2 paper bags tipped over. Beets rolled. A loaf of bread landed crust down on the pavement. She had bent slowly, one hand on the cart, when a girl's voice said, "I got the bread." A man was already crouching beside her, quiet, unhurried. He picked up the beets one by one. He set the bread on top, brushed the grit off its paper wrapper, and slid the bag back into the cart. "Everett," he said, when she thanked him. That was all. No last name. Eleanor's eyes rested on him half a second longer than a stranger's should. Then she smiled at the little girl in the pink windbreaker, who had already run back to pick up a stray onion. "And what's your name, dear?" "Poppy." Eleanor filed the man's face away like a page slipped between older pages. The months that followed unfolded in slow overlap. Everett kneeling on the front porch, coaxing a stuck screen door. Everett tightening the light fixture over the kitchen sink. Everett driving Eleanor to the eye clinic on Broad Street and waiting with a paperback in the lobby. Eleanor's kitchen filling, week by week, with the shape of a small girl at the counter, chin on her palm, kicking her heels against the stool. Poppy told Eleanor about the turtle in the schoolyard pond, the one that only came up when nobody moved. Eleanor listened the way she had once listened to quarterly reports, entirely and without amusement. She stirred cocoa. She let the child take the whisk. There was no drama in these fragments. There was only regularity, a man who did not mention what he did for a living, a woman who did not ask. Then the room reassembled around the present. Sunday, South Battery, the wrench on the rug. Marlowe standing in the archway with her mouth still open. Everett did not move for a long moment. His eyes traveled from Eleanor's teacup to the framed photograph above the sideboard, the one he must have passed 100 times without really seeing. A woman in her 50s on a boat dock in Kiowa, laughing at something outside the frame. Eleanor, younger, recognizable, Miss Eleanor Prescott. He understood, and the understanding did not arrive as anger. It arrived as the long, steady silence of a man who long ago had stopped believing in coincidence. He had learned to distrust the accidents of his own life. This one was only more of the same shape. Marlowe watched him wait for a reaction. She wanted him to accuse, to explain, to defend. He did none of these. He looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor looked back at him the way she had been looking at him for 6 months, and something passed between them that had nothing at all to do with Marlowe. That, more than any argument, was what left Marlowe adrift in her own mother's parlor. She had walked in on a country whose language she did not speak, and she had been paying its taxes for years. "I should let you two talk," Everett said. He gathered the wrench, laid it in the leather roll on the floor, folded the roll. He wiped his hands on a shop cloth from his back pocket. To Eleanor he said, "The door will hold through Wednesday. I'll come back." "You'll come back on Sunday," Eleanor said. "Sunday, then." He nodded to Marlowe as he passed her, not deferential, not angry, only the plain nod of a man walking through a doorway. Then he was gone, out the back garden path the way he always left. Marlowe stood in the middle of the parlor. Her hand was still on the strap of her bag. Eleanor poured a second cup and slid it across the low table. "Sit down, Marlowe. Whom did you fire?" "An analyst. Mid-level. Data leak. Bale walked me through the forensics." "Sit down." Marlowe sat. Eleanor rose from her armchair with the small stiffness she rarely let anyone see, crossed to the writing desk between the windows, and pulled open the second drawer. She lifted out a leather folder gone soft with age. She laid it on the table between them and opened it to the title page. Prescott, Risk Framework Foundational Architecture, September 2016, below in fountain pen. Everett A. Bramwell, lead architect. The framework Harrison Vale has been calling proprietary for 4 years, Eleanor said. Do you know who wrote it? Marlowe reached out and touched the signature. The paper was cool. He came to me in the spring of 2016, Eleanor continued. His wife was still alive. He was quiet. He worked 7 months straight in Office 3 on the second floor. When it was done, I offered him the head chair on my quantitative desk. He asked to be a mid-level analyst instead. He said he had a little girl coming and he did not want a life that would swallow her. I let him have what he asked for. Why didn't you tell me? You didn't ask who built the house you're living in. Marlowe's hand stayed on the page. She was not embarrassed yet. Embarrassment would come later, in the car, when nobody could see her. Right now, she was doing something colder, running the last 3 weeks back through her head, and then the last 3 years, and finding, at each frame, the same small figure she had walked past without noticing. Where does he live? Wagner Terrace. There's a blue mailbox at the corner. That night, Marlowe drove across town in a car she rarely took out of the garage. She parked 2 houses down from a narrow townhouse with a maple in front. The porch light was on. The kitchen light was on. Through the sheer curtain, she saw a small silhouette pass and pause, and pass again, a girl carrying something two-handed. Poppy. Marlowe did not get out. Her hand rested on the door lever and then let go. She watched the kitchen light for 15 minutes without moving. Once, she saw the shape of a man's shoulder cross the window, bending toward the girl, and the shape stayed bent for a long time, the way you stay bent for a child who is telling you something important. She put the car in reverse. She drove home the long way, past the seawall, past the shrimp boats, past everything she had always assumed belonged to her. Monday morning, Prescott Capitol, 22nd floor. Marlowe was at her desk by 6:45. The building was still quiet. She asked her assistant to pull the Bramwell termination file from HR archives. Complete, not the executive summary. At 10, she called Harrison Vale into her office. He arrived with a linen jacket over his arm, unhurried, the picture of a man who had already won this meeting in his head. You wanted to revisit the Bramwell matter. Walk me through the evidence. Internal leak. IP forensics were clean. Sign-out log, credential chain, everything traced to his laptop. Marlowe, you signed. That door's closed. Walk me through the forensics anyway. He talked for 11 minutes in dense terms: hash chains, credential rotation, sandbox mirrors. He did not once name a specific file or a specific date. His hands, usually still, kept moving to his cuffs. Who else had access to the server log the week you flagged it? A half-second delay. Only IT. And me, obviously. That's the point of the escalation protocol. Send me the raw log. The raw log is with the general counsel. Send it to me by end of day. When he was gone, she stood at the window a long time. The harbor was white with morning. She called the head of IT herself, from her cell, and asked whether any other credential had accessed the log server in the week before the flag. The answer was careful. There were protocols. It would take a day or two. She realized, standing there, what she had done. She had signed a termination on the strength of a summary written by the man being summarized about. She had called that decisiveness. She had told herself the word discipline. It had been laziness in a good coat. That afternoon at 4, she left the office. She did not tell anyone where she was going. She drove to South Battery and parked under the crepe myrtle and walked up the brick path without knocking. Everett was not there. The house felt the same. Cora was in the kitchen slicing an apple into slow, even wedges. Eleanor was on the back porch. Poppy was on the wicker chair beside her, a small harmonica cupped in both hands. She was working through "You Are My Sunshine" one note at a time. Imperfect, patient, the same measure over and over until it held. Eleanor sat with her eyes closed and her hands folded, a small smile at the corners of her mouth. Marlowe stopped in the doorway. She could not make herself step onto the porch. She felt, ridiculously, that she had not been invited. Eleanor did not turn her head. "Would you like to hear the rest of it?" Marlowe nodded before remembering her mother could not see her, then said softly, "Yes." She sat on the porch step, 2 paces from Poppy's chair. She did not speak to the child, and the child did not speak to her, and this was the correct arrangement. Poppy started the phrase again. She got through it. She went back to the beginning, and this time she played it whole. The small breath at the end audible. When she was done, Eleanor opened her eyes and said, "Very fine, Poppy." And Poppy beamed, and Marlowe realized she had not exhaled for a full measure. The second week began without ceremony. Everett did not skip a beat. Tuesday, he fixed a slow drip under the kitchen sink at South Battery. Thursday, he drove Eleanor to the vascular clinic on Rutledge Avenue and waited in the lobby with a battered paperback about the Mississippi Delta. Nobody mentioned Sunday. Marlowe began to appear at Eleanor's house at those hours. The first time she told her mother she was just stopping by. The second time she did not offer a reason, but she had coffee in her hand and her jacket was folded neatly over the newel post. The third time, Eleanor and Cora simply set a place for her at the counter. Everett did the same. Nobody asked. There was a Thursday afternoon in the kitchen that lasted, in Marlowe's memory afterward, longer than the calendar allowed. Everett was peeling an apple for Poppy with a small paring knife. He went in a slow, unbroken spiral, and Poppy watched the ribbon lengthen with the concentration of a scientist. Marlowe stood with her hip against the refrigerator and both hands around her mug. Cora was at the sink, wringing out a dishcloth without haste. They talked about nothing. The weather that would not break. The magnolia in the back garden, whose leaves had started to yellow at the edges. Poppy's campaign to be permitted a dog, which Everett met, again with the same phrase. "When you are old enough to walk it in the rain." Marlowe reached for the paper towel roll on the counter. Everett's hand was already there. Their fingers touched. Neither of them moved for a full second. The apple ribbon continued to fall. Poppy did not look up. Cora, without turning, adjusted the water. It was nothing that could be reported to anyone. It was only that a woman who had spent 3 years learning to be brisk allowed her hand to stay where it was, and a man who had spent longer than that learning to be alone did not withdraw his. Then Marlowe took a paper towel, and Everett went back to his spiral, and the room continued. Later, on the porch, Marlowe asked her mother the question she had been holding since Sunday. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Eleanor lifted her cup. She did not answer for a long time. Then she said, in the same low tone she used for weather, "Because I learned from your father. Power is only worth trusting when the one who holds it goes out to find the truth by herself. If I had put it on your desk, you would have believed me. You would not have believed yourself. That's a hard lesson. That's the only lesson." Marlowe watched a container ship push west on the Ashley, red as rust in the late sun. From inside the kitchen, the harmonica started up again, tentative, a phrase she did not recognize. "He hasn't asked me for anything," Marlowe said. "He never will. Then how am I supposed to make this right?" Eleanor's eyes stayed on the water. "You are not supposed to make it right. You are supposed to see it clearly. What happens after that is not up to you." Marlowe let the cup warm her palms. The tide was turning. She did not go home for another hour. By the middle of the second week, Harrison Vale knew. He did not know how much. He knew that the head of IT had taken an extra day on a routine question. He knew that Marlowe had stopped asking him for the daily portfolio brief and started asking for the underlying data. He knew that she had not accepted his last 3 lunch invitations. He was not a stupid man. He began to move. An internal email went out on Wednesday morning to 3 members of the executive committee. Subject line: Close of the Bramwell chapter. The body suggested a short press statement, nothing punitive, only clarifying, reaffirming the integrity of the firm's proprietary analytics and drawing a line under a personnel matter that had run its course. He copied Nolan Prescott, who sat on the board, and who was Marlowe's uncle, and who had never entirely reconciled himself to a niece running the firm his sister built. By Thursday afternoon, Nolan called Marlowe. "You're letting a disgruntled ex-employee steer you. It doesn't reflect well. I say this as family. You say it as a board member. I say it as both. There's a quarterly on Saturday. I'd like you prepared." She thanked him and hung up. She stood at her window for a while, watching a tug turn in the harbor. What Nolan had just given her, without meaning to, was confirmation. She was not being contradicted because she was wrong. She was being contradicted because she was beginning to be right. The distinction was small and clarifying, and it settled the last of her hesitation. That evening, Everett came to South Battery to look at a second-floor window sash that had been sticking since the summer humidity. Marlowe was in the reading room across the hall, laptop open, pretending to answer email. She was not answering email. She was watching the door. He worked for 20 minutes. Then he came to the doorway and leaned against the frame and said, in a voice pitched just for her, Have you read the summary Vale sent you? Yourself? Not the summary. The raw log. He nodded once. Then I don't have anything to add. He did not leave immediately. He stood in the doorway another few seconds. Marlowe did not lift her eyes from her screen, because if she did, she was not certain what she would do. He went back down the hall. She heard the sash rise and lower once, cleanly. Then she heard him tell Eleanor good night. Saturday morning was Poppy's school assembly at Buist Academy, a third-grade group singing 3 songs about the ocean. Marlowe did not tell anyone she was going. She parked 2 blocks away and slipped into the last row of the auditorium as the lights dimmed. Poppy was in the second row of children, in a pale yellow sweater, mouth open on the wide vowels of the sea. She did not see Marlowe. Everett did. He was in the third row of parents, on the aisle. He turned his head once, caught her eye across the dark room, and gave her the smallest possible nod. He did not tell his daughter. He did not want the child to know she was being witnessed by anyone she had not chosen. Marlowe stayed through all 3 songs and left before the lights came up. Monday at 12:45, Cora Landry appeared in the doorway of Marlowe's office. She was in a plain gray cardigan, and she was holding a shoebox tied with garden twine. "I didn't call ahead," she said. "You would have said not to come." "Sit down, Cora." Cora sat. She set the box on the desk between them and untied the twine with the deliberation of a woman who had practiced this in her head for a long time. Inside were envelopes. 14 of them. Stamped, addressed in Eleanor Prescott's slanted, unhurried hand. Marlowe Prescott, CEO, Prescott Capital, King Street, Charleston. The postmarks ran from the first week of April through the third week of September. Not one had been opened. "Miss Eleanor writes to you every week," Cora said. "I put them in the mailbox in front of the house myself. The carrier confirms delivery downstairs, but you have never received one. Have you?" Marlowe touched the top envelope. "Not one." Cora slid a second item across the desk. It was a photocopy from the mailroom logbook of the tower, the daily receipt sheet for board and executive correspondence. Beside each envelope's tracking number, the same signature, 14 times. The executive assistant to Harrison Vale. Marlowe opened the earliest envelope. Her mother's ink. Short paragraph. Marlowe. Today, Everett showed Poppy how to see when a wooden door has settled off square. He put her hand on the frame and asked her to feel where the corner had dropped. "I thought you should know who he is, not as a personnel file, but in the kitchen of an old woman who is nothing to him." She opened a second. "Marlowe, he drove me to Dr. Halloran's. He waited in the lobby with a book. He did not read it. He watched the door." She opened a third. She stopped after the fourth. She sat back in her chair. She did not cry. What was happening to her was larger and slower than crying, the sensation of a floor she had been walking on for 6 months, revealing itself to have been carpet laid over another floor she had never inspected. Vale had not merely framed a man. He had curated her attention. He had decided, week by week, which pieces of her mother's life would reach her. "How many weeks?" Marlowe said at last. 24. She still writes. "There are 2 more on my counter I have not brought yet." "Bring them." Cora nodded. She waited. Then she said, in a quieter voice, "She has never blamed you, Miss Marlowe. She only waited." "For what?" "For you to come by the house without a reason." Marlowe folded the letter she was holding along its original creases, set it back in its envelope, and returned the envelope to the box. She retied the twine herself, careful of the knot. She lifted the box against her chest with both arms, the way one carries a sleeping child, and walked out of the office. She took it home. She did not open another envelope that night. She set the box on the kitchen counter under the pendant light, and sat on the stool opposite it, and looked at it until the light outside her window had gone from blue to black. Then she picked up her phone and called the head of IT and said, "Send me everything." She spent Friday evening at South Battery. No laptop, no phone in her hand. She sat on the love seat in the reading room beside her mother, closer than she had sat since college. Eleanor did not ask about the firm. She told instead the story of the November evening in 1979 when she had first met Marlowe's father at a gallery opening on Broad Street, in a dress she had made herself, next to a painting neither of them had liked. Marlowe had heard the outline of the story before. She had never heard the detail of the painting, or the small argument they had had over it, or the way he had walked her home the long way to prove a point. Eleanor told it without sentiment. It was a story about a woman deciding to be seen by a man on her own terms. Marlo listened with her hands loose in her lap. When her mother was done, she said, "Thank you," and Eleanor said, "It's only a story," and neither of them believed that. Everett arrived at 6, to look at the porch hinge that had been on his list for 2 weeks. He did not know the letters had arrived at Marlowe's office. He did not know Cora had gone. He did not know anything except that it was Friday and there was a hinge, and he had said he would come. Cora set out chicken soup and yesterday's bread and a small dish of butter, 4 of them at the kitchen table, Eleanor at the head, Marlo on her right, Everett across, Poppy on a booster between the 2 women. Nobody mentioned the board. Poppy showed Marlo her spiral notebook with the names she had picked for her hypothetical future turtles. There were 11 names. One of them was Marlo. "Why that one?" Marlo asked, careful. "It's a good name," Poppy said. "It sounds like a river." Everett did not react. Cora, at the sink, adjusted the water. After the plates were cleared, Everett took Poppy home. In the front hall, while the child was putting on her shoes, Marlo handed him a manila envelope. It was thick, the raw log, she said. Every credential that touched the file that week. It was Vale, from his workstation. Time-stamped 72 hours before the flag. He seated the fingerprint himself. She held his eyes. "You can sue with this. You have grounds." Everett took the envelope. He did not open it. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the parlor a week before, quiet, level. "I was never going to sue," he said. "I was going to wait." He handed the envelope back. "But you might need it." She took it. Poppy had her shoes on. Everett put a hand on the child's shoulder and turned toward the door. "Everett." He stopped. She did not say anything more. She only stood there, the envelope against her thigh. He nodded once, small, and then he and his daughter stepped out into the cool evening on South Battery and were gone. She stayed the night in her old bedroom. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and said only, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" "What I should have done 3 years ago." Eleanor nodded and closed the door. Across town, at that same hour, Harrison Vale was at dinner with Nolan Prescott at a restaurant on East Bay, laughing lightly at something, entirely confident about Saturday morning. He did not know the shoebox existed. The 22nd floor boardroom faced east over the harbor. Saturday, 9 in the morning. 7 members of the board present, plus Marlo, plus Vale, plus a corporate secretary at the small side table with her recorder. Vale opened. He had evidently spent Friday night working. His voice was measured, regretful. He proposed an executive session to discuss recent lapses in the CEO's judgment, an interim reallocation of authority, and a vote of no confidence. Nolan seconded. 2 other members shifted in their chairs. Marlo let him finish. Then she asked the corporate secretary to distribute a folder to each seat. There were 3 tabs. Nobody spoke while the folders were handed around. Tab 1, the leather-bound original of the Prescott Risk Framework, September 2016, with the signature line legible on the title page, Everett A. Bramwell, lead architect. Beside it, a copy of the current firm marketing prospectus, in which the same framework was described as developed and owned internally under the direction of the Chief Operating Officer. Tab 2. The raw server log for the week of the alleged leak. Highlighted in yellow. A single-sequence credential HV.admin, workstation at Vale's desk. 7:22 on the Sunday before the flag was raised, writing a foreign hash into a file that would be discovered on Everett Bramwell's laptop 48 hours later. Tab 3. 14 photocopied envelopes, each with a mailroom receipt on the facing page, each receipt signed by the same hand. Vale began to protest. His voice was not entirely steady. Marlo cut him off, not loudly. "I am not conducting a hearing, Harrison. I am placing on the table what should have reached my desk 6 months ago." Nolan read tab 2. His face went gray. He did not look at Vale. Then the boardroom door opened, halfway. Eleanor Prescott walked in. She used a slender cane, more for reassurance than support. Cora was a step behind her, carrying nothing. Eleanor did not have a seat on the current board. She had not been in this room in more than 3 years. She crossed to the head of the long table to the chair that used to be hers, and she sat down. She set her cane against the arm of the chair. She folded her hands in front of her. She did not say a single word. Her presence was the entire argument. The vote was called. 7-2. Vale suspended immediately pending outside council review. All executive access revoked before he left the floor. 2 votes against Nolan and 1 older director, but Nolan, at the end, asked to withdraw his vote from the record. He did not name a reason. He could not bring himself to look at his sister. The board rose. Vale collected his jacket without collecting anything else. He passed Eleanor on his way out. She did not turn her head. Marlowe stayed at the table after everyone had gone. Her mother stayed too, at the far end. Neither of them spoke. The harbor was very bright. Saturday afternoon. Marlowe drove to Wagoner Terrace, and this time she got out of the car. Everett opened the door in a gray work shirt, sleeves pushed up. Poppy was at the kitchen table behind him, halfway through a drawing. Marlowe did not step inside. The board wants me to extend a formal offer. Head of Quantitative Strategy, full back pay for the termination period. Benefits reinstated to the original hire date. Equity vesting on the founder track. Everett listened the whole way through without interrupting. When she was done, he shook his head slowly. I don't want to come back as an employee. She had arrived ready to argue the number. He did not give her the chance. But I will sit on an advisory chair. Twice a month. No salary, no title on the door. Only to make sure the framework does not get rewritten again by the next Vale. Those are your terms. Those are what I can give. Poppy appeared at his elbow with a folded sheet of drawing paper. She unfolded it for Marlowe herself, ceremonial. On the paper, 3 figures on a porch. A man in a blue shirt, an old woman in the middle chair with a cup, a small girl on the porch step. Behind them, a house with a very careful mahogany door. Marlowe crouched to be level with the child. It's beautiful, Poppy. There's not a 4th chair, Poppy said. She looked at Marlowe for a long, evaluative second. Do you want to be in the next one? Marlowe could not answer before the child had already turned and run back to the kitchen for another color. She stayed on one knee a moment longer than she needed to. Then she stood. Everett was looking at her from the doorway. The same steady look, no expression she could name. He tilted his head half an inch toward the street. She's expecting me to fix the side door on Sunday, same time. Are you coming? Yes. She walked back to her car. She did not look over her shoulder. She heard the front door close behind her only when she was already in the driver's seat. She sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. The sun was on the maple in the yard. A leaf came loose and turned, brown and gold, and landed on her hood, and she watched it lie there before she turned the key. She took South Battery the long way home. She passed her mother's house without stopping. The porch was empty. Everett had not arrived yet. He would not arrive until tomorrow. That night she opened the box of envelopes. She read them in order. She took her time. She read the ones that mentioned Poppy and the ones that mentioned nothing at all, a report on the state of the Magnolia, a note on a shrimp boat Eleanor had watched come in at dawn. Ordinary. Weekly. Faithful. The next Sunday arrived with the pale, dry light of early November on the harbor. The palmettos on South Battery moved once and settled. Inside the house, Cora was at the counter with Poppy, both of them cutting shapes out of gingerbread dough, and Poppy was very serious about the stars. Everett knelt at the side door, wrench in hand, the same blue flannel with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He had just finished the top screw when he heard the back gate. He did not look up. Marlowe let herself in through the garden path. She had her own key. She had always had her own key. She had just, until this year, not used it on a Sunday. Eleanor was in her chair on the porch, cup in her hands, watching the roof of a shrimp boat move past the seawall. Marlowe sat down beside her. She did not speak. You came early, Eleanor said. I wanted to be here before he was finished. Eleanor smiled at the water without turning her head. Then you have understood. There was a small sound inside the house, the wrench being set down, the low murmur of Cora saying something kind to Poppy, the scrape of a chair. Everett came through the doorway onto the porch, wiping his hands on the same faded shop cloth. He saw Marlowe. He was not surprised. He nodded to her the way he nodded to Eleanor. He did not sit down. I'll bring Poppy out, he said. He went back inside. When he returned, the child was holding a plate of warm gingerbread stars in both hands, with the bright attention of somebody entrusted with something breakable. She stopped in front of Eleanor and handed her one, and Eleanor took it. She gave one to Everett, and he took it. She stopped in front of Marlowe. She did not ask. She simply lifted the plate an inch. Marlowe took the star. The four of them sat on the porch as the light turned from pale gold to honey along the seawall. From the kitchen, Cora had put on the old record player, and the first slow measure of a harmonica hymn drifted out through the screen door. Not Poppy this time. An older recording, gentle, patient. Nobody said anything large. Poppy leaned against her father's knee. Eleanor's cup was empty. Marlowe finished her star. Everett looked at her once, briefly, across the space between the two porch chairs. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Down on the water, the shrimp boat rounded the point and disappeared behind the palmettos. The record needle lifted and settled into the next groove. Somewhere in the house, a screen door tapped twice in the wind and was quiet. None of them said the word family, and none of them needed to.